Hello and welcome to episode 132 of Prose. This week, practice witchcraft on your ex's new partner. You heard correctly. This week we only have one rather long short story. For our next episode in 2 weeks' time, we'll actually have an even longer single short story. I'm starting to get curious if I need to stop calling the stories short. But I digress. While you listen, please head over to prosepodcast.com as our one-stop shop for all things prose. From there, you can follow the program on social media under @ProsePodcast across all social media platforms, and you can also find the small but growing online store there. If you are enjoying the show, please click that 5-star review button for Prose wherever you're listening, and do consider leaving a review as well. It really helps a lot. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using whatever app or medium you're using right now. Do go check out the Prose Patreon page at patreon.com/prosepodcast and consider supporting the show there. I'll give you a load of gratitude as well as some swag from the show as part of that deal. And again, all of this is at prosepodcast.com. To do another quick plug for social media, especially if you follow the show on Instagram, you'll get some other treats too, like images that accompany our stories. At any rate, let's get to the tales, shall we? This week we have Hexbag for a Douchebag. Enjoy. Hexbag for a Douchebag, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Yup, it was time for Mark E. Hawkson to die. Well, if not die, then to wish for death. To plead with me to end his hellish existence and the unending pain he was in, only to have me laugh and ensure he knew it would never stop. I'm not a monster. You see, it all started when I found myself on stage with Congressional Representative Reed from Georgia. I was just taking my place up there amid a combination meeting, announcement set, and wedding. Strange, I know. When I realized my fly was down. Super embarrassing at any time, but to be in front of this many people with my boxers or my penis hanging out was mortifying. I turned around with my back to the audience to do my best to surreptitiously zip up. The representative saw me do this, looked down and noticed my fly was a little wet to boot. Now, this was because I had wiped my wet hands on my pants. A bad habit that I just seemed unable to shake. It always bore with it dumb jokes from the less mature people around me. Still, even though it was apparent the moisture was from water, this immature man, this immature representative, he still made a joke at my expense, asking me if I had wet myself. I, of course, said no, laughed a little bit for his sake, and went on to rub the wet down just a little bit more, trying to dry it a little before turning back around. I did this as quickly and calmly and smoothly as possible so it didn't look like I was playing with myself, right there in front of God and 3,000 attendees of this strange jumble of a get-together. I definitely didn't need those jokes to add to those that I was already growing accustomed to. That is when I saw them out in the crowd. Mark and my ex. I had always known Mark to be abusive, physically, verbally, and sexually toward women. So it had come as a surprise that even my rather self-centered, narcissistic, disgusting ex-girlfriend would fall for such a self-centered, narcissistic, disgusting, and abusive guy like Mark. I know I'm slow. I shouldn't have been surprised. Out there in the crowd, the two of them laughed and carried on like the best of friends in the perfect relationship. They were the couple everyone else wanted to be and who they wanted to be around. They were both immaculately groomed for the event. And, worst of all, my current boss and friend was sitting right next to them, carrying on in the frivolity and joviality. He used to be their boss too, but I had come away thinking he was one of the very few in the company that actually cut ties with them after all the cheating and lying and unprofessionalism that had seen their relationship blossom, while mine with her remained technically ongoing. Clearly, I was wrong. I endured the first little bit of speaking from Representative Reed and then immediately made my way to the backstage area once he concluded, and we were met with a small break between events and speakers. Back there, Solomon, my boss, came and found me. He started to talk feverishly about how we were doing great things together at our company, and that my being involved with Representative Reed looked great for a business. He knew he was a jerk, but that's okay. I was doing a great job. In fact, he said, we were actually being invited to take part in a high-powered softball league that only the most elite of the city got to be a part of. He went on to quickly, again feverishly, talk about jerseys and numbers and softball positions for all of us in the company, but I was seething. I did not even try to fake a smile for him amid the sporty buddy-buddy chit-chattery he was throwing my way. I told him that our inclusion in the league was wonderful in the most flat tone possible and followed it with letting him know that I was very displeased at his show of disloyalty out there for so very many eyes. I said that was far from classy. He felt awkward and walked away. Classic Solomon. Big talk, no follow-through when the tough times came. I stayed in the back through the first third of the remaining program. I wasn't needed after all, but I rejoined the wedding party when it was time for that part of the events. I might be sick to my stomach and angry to the point of violence, but I wasn't going to allow a friend's wedding day to be ruined because of me. I was no big part of the wedding. However, I did want to play my small role and be out there for my friends and coworkers for whom this was a special day. I didn't care about too terribly many of them, but the handful that had always supported me deserved my presence, my attention, and my acting as normal as I could amid the tumult in my heart and my head. The wedding ended with tears and hoots upon a final kiss from the couple, and then it was time for the reception. I had no intention of staying, and I made good on those intentions. I went to my car, I slammed the door hard upon getting there, and I headed home with malice in my heart. I didn't want to go to jail. That is just about the only reason I didn't start planning a murder. I hated Mark. He was one of the most vile people I ever knew. He had no use in this world, beyond harming those around him and being a vacuous male cliché brought to life by some Frankensteinian nightmare. As I sat and stewed in the dark in my small studio apartment, I began to think of other ways of hurting Mark. I thought of harming something he owned, something he loved. His car was just about the only thing he gives a shit about, truly. Why not break that in some way? But that would still land me in the hot seat with the cops. I thought about turning him into immigration enforcement, because he was, as was common knowledge, an immigrant, albeit one that was both technically legal-ish and that liked to hide in plain sight because of his ancestry. The fact that he was virulent and hateful toward other immigrants, took on stances of sexism, authoritarianism, and homophobia, and in general embraced right-wing hate only added to just how awful he was. But that option just rankled me the wrong way. I hated ICE, and I didn't know if I could do that to anyone, even my literal worst enemy. It would seem like I was supporting the whole damn morally bankrupt institutional systemic thing. Then an epiphany hit me, or more of a remembrance. I thought back to my Uncle Jack and some of the things he taught me during my summers. You see, every summer I spent down in southern Mississippi with my dad's side of the family. During the months of June, July, and August, we baked in the sun and toiled on the land together. While we worked, we learned together too. My immediate family and I taught our less educated, less fortunate side of the family all sorts of things about finance and the world at large. The family from Mississippi taught us how to sustain ourselves on the land and a few extra things to boot. Uncle Jack tossed in some magic for the mix. See, Uncle Jack was Cajun and from northern Louisiana where the bayous meet Mississippi. He knew voodoo, hoodoo, mojo, and all sorts of dark and different sorts of arts. His stepmama was Haitian Creole, and she taught him and raised him up right in magic. And that is when it came to me there in the dark in my small metropolitan apartment. I realized that I had the answer to Mark, to the virus he was spreading across our planet. I would make a hexbag for this douchebag. A hexbag is an answer when one wants control over a situation but doesn't necessarily want to bring harm that will end a life. Certainly a hexbag can help one end someone's life, but they are more regularly used to inflict severe damage and harm right up to the point of death before withdrawing those powers and allowing the victim to live in fear and constant agony. That sounded like precisely the medicine that Mark needed. So I began to do my research into hexbags. Most people have only heard of hexbags through shows like Buffy or X-Files or Charmed or, God help me, Supernatural. The lattermost of those is the most recent and made the most use of them as a plot device. So that's where most of the modern quote-unquote lore of late comes from. Needless to say, it's 99% wrong or utter fiction. That show would have you believe that hexbags are sacks of special plants, potent herbs, bones of some special beastie, or even artifacts of a human subject. I mean, that part isn't too terribly far off, but the rest of the in-show lore is what is questionable. The most objectionable of those is that you can do all the same things with a thrice-cursed coin. That's just a heap of bullshit right there, let me tell you. Additionally, they use them for damn near everything. Love, hate, vengeance, marriage, sex, enslavement, severe injury, severe self-injury, or, of course, to kill someone. Some of that is doable with a hexbag, for sure. Most of it isn't. The lovey-dovey functions generally are a no-go, unless you can put love potion and mind control in the same category. To say that John fell in love with Jane because of a hexbag is a misnomer. To say that John is being controlled by Jane to enact the actions of someone being in love because of a hexbag. Now, that is some real hoodoo voodoo. Hexbags are meant to be offensive, unless you use the offense purposes as the best defense, as the old adage from sports goes. The most convenient thing about hexbags is that they simply need to be in close proximity to your intended target to affect them. Physical contact is helpful, but it's not necessary. More importantly, if you can determine the target's place of power, their special happy place, if you will, where they feel comfortable, safe, the Hexbag can stay there and still affect the target anywhere and everywhere they go. It's like the Hexbag is riding around in their soul. To break the spell is rather complicated too. The TV shows that use Hexbags generally say that once the bag is burned, the connection is severed. But that's just not the case. The target of a Hexbag is stuck with the hex until the bag is found, unbound through a counter or breaking curse, emptied into blessed water, not necessarily holy water as Roman Catholics understand it, the bag burned, and the target and the space fully cleansed through a damned complex ritual that not too terribly many know anymore. God knows that Mark wouldn't know anybody that knew hoodoo, voodoo, or any sort of mojo. Fantastic. Note, I can't say the word victim when it comes to good old battle Mark Hoxon. He is no victim. He is a deserving target, and I'll not say otherwise. For my Hexbag, I had to combine several traditions beyond those with which my uncle was familiar. I did not want to allow this jackass to commit suicide. I wanted him to be able to harm himself, sure, but I had to imbue a compulsion to seek help if the self-harm that I wanted woven in there and here and everywhere through the hex got out of control or life-threatening. This was a complex weaving of spells and contents for the bag right there. Moreover, the first major set of pains I thought to inflict and wanted to invest in the Hexbag was on his nails. Fingernails and toenails both. I wanted the nail beds to rot, to turn black and stinky and oozy, and the nails to begin to fall off one by one. Sometimes crumbling, sometimes chipping, sometimes just popping right off. Then, I wanted them to heal and do it all over again, over and over and over. In a perfect world, the Hexbag would do this for eternity, causing both a debilitating, lingering pain and Mark to stink to high heavens, becoming a nasty human being with whom to share anything resembling a close space. He would carry with him a disgusting sight, a putrid smell, and an utterly agonizing pain. Beautiful. So, I had to ensure that the Hexbag could both harm and heal where appropriate. Too much of the former could kill him, say, through infection. Too much of the latter would help him avoid the worst of the pain, which was counterproductive for my purpose. Making the bag itself was difficult as well. I'm no bleeding heart vegan or anything, but I don't like having to harm animals. In fact, I never do. Just to make the bag, though, I needed to sacrifice something living and tan the hide. I chose a neighborhood cat that had swiped at my dog every night for a year. It was mean, it was all but feral, it was most likely diseased. It even attacked old Mrs. Jones, the little old lady who fed it near her home. The killing of the cat really shook me, messed me up, I'm not gonna lie. The cleaning of the carcass and tanning of the hide wasn't so bad. Once life is out of something, it just doesn't hold the same spark in this world after all. Now, hoodoo is a combination of centuries of mixing and matching. It is a jambalaya of African slaves, European immigrants, peoples indigenous to the far reaches of the Western Hemisphere. If you look hard enough, you can find folklore from Finland, right up against god worship from Ghana. It's truly fascinating. But I also wasn't sticking just to hoodoo. If you go look up hoodoo in a dictionary or on Wikipedia, you're not going to find what I did here. I tossed in some voodoo. I tossed in some mojo. All that being what it is, to keep to my purposes and not forget my Uncle Jack's mama, I kept a small portrait of Toussaint Louverture, the great liberator of Haiti, right there as I was working by my workstation. I thought that having her spirit be proud of me as she watched over me from the other shore would be a good idea. Having Toussaint Louverture there meant that, were she watching, she would indeed be proud of her blood and how her knowledge was being put to use for justice in the present. Now again, I didn't just stick strictly to hoodoo. What most would call voodoo is its kissing cousin, and Uncle Jack's mama was maybe even more well-versed in that tradition. I was thankful for that. Because of her experience and the knowledge she passed on through the family, I knew to pay my proper respects to the Loa, so they would see my hands be true and my spirit not be harmed in the hexing. I knew to make the marks of Ezekiel's wheel on the inside of my bag, right alongside the marks of all the great Loa from all the great places of Africa. I knew that making a gris-gris before starting the heavy lifting on the Hexbag was maybe the most important part. The talisman would protect me from any darkness trying to creep into me, and any evil spirits that were alerted to my existence amid my fell purpose, while also alerting my ancestors who had passed before to the other shore that I needed their eyes and ears to keep me from harm from the spirit world. Whether you call it a gris-gris or a gree-gree, this was necessary. Without all of that knowledge, Mark might have gone unchecked in this world. Uncle Jack's mama was my best friend right now. Of all the Loa markings I put into the hex bag, the Congo Loa were the most heavily represented. This was purposeful. The Congolese version of these spirits covered the whole of one's earthly experience. Birth, life, death, and rebirth, with a particular interest in the human soul and where it ended up. This is by no means exclusive to them, but they do seem a bit more preoccupied with either uplifting or torturing right down to the human soul itself, which seemed appropriate for this fuckstick. The Congo Loa would keep eyes on the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and they would not allow Mark to cross over into the other shore. He couldn't die, even if he died, if you will. They would keep the soul exiled from the realm of death, thereby ensuring him almost a form of eternal life specifically marked for the use of suffering through my hex bag. I also leaned heavily on the Petro Loa, since they were the best at using malevolent magics. Unlike the helpful Reda Loa, who had been born on the African continent, the Petro had been born in the New World amid the abomination that was slavery. They were angry. Rightfully so. They wanted to harm. Mother Azili Dantor was who I most needed to be generous with. So I strung strings of blue, red, and green silk through the little holes punched in the hex bag, making it almost a miniature altar to the Great Spirit. Inside the bag, I smeared crème de cacao on its sides, another tribute to Azili Dantor. I also put the blackened bones of the cat sacrifice, a dead man's knuckle bone, a piece of Mark's hair, that I had sneakily taken from his local barbershop, clippings from a ram's hoof, that was harder to acquire than the hair, a raven's feather, a golden ring with a jewel set in it, sapphire I think, from a woman left alone and pregnant by a straying husband, and a few more odds and ends into the small cat leather bag. I tied it up tightly, passed several different types of incense over it, and sprinkled it with agua de Florida, another favorite of the great Rara Loa mother. This had the added benefit of taking the char or stink away from all the other processes that went into making the bag. All anyone would sniff out from it until the scents died down would be a very pleasant mixture of oranges, lavender, and cloves. Before I activated the bag, I also sought out a crossroads there in the city. One needs a liminal place, a not here and not there space to help communicate between worlds. The hex bag is really just a line of communication to the spirit world. Burying some of Mark's hair and part of the cat sacrifice near a crossroads was the way to ensure that there wouldn't be any dropped calls, so to speak. The crossroads, Loa's, brother Legba, and the much more powerful and frightening Papagere would see to that now. I couldn't have Mark finding any respite from this torture after all. Then it was just a matter of getting into his apartment, where he and my ex now lived together. That wasn't too terribly difficult. They loved to go out and be seen. They thrived off the attention of others and sought that attention nightly. I only had to choose a night where they were out, which they were 6 out of 7, and go to put the bag in the very baseboards of the place. I chose a night when they were going to a club with some of the people that I had once called work friends, but now knew to be rather fair-weather work acquaintances at best. Admittedly, prying those boards up took a good long while, but I knew that booze and showing off for my current and their former coworkers would do the trick of keeping them away long enough. That was it. Once I was done, I went back outside and stood across the street from Mark's place, completing the ritual. I had to explicitly dictate the terms of the Hexbag, and I didn't want it to stop at Mark's fingernails and toenails. No way. Mark's stomach would prove bilious, and he would find that he had chronic acid reflux, flatulence, and general stink to him that just couldn't be controlled by a diet. Mark's back and knees would begin to crack, then pull in all sorts of horrific ways. He would be unable to work out or run. His body would atrophy faster than it should. His back would stoop a bit. He would become slovenly rather quickly. Mark would look damn near 64 in maybe 3 months' time. Mark would find that he had a worsening bout with erectile dysfunction. Poor schmuck just couldn't get it up these days amid the worsening health and waning fitness. Mark would have excessive earwax. Mark would have extreme halitosis. Mark would find that his skin would start to flake off, then slough off in larger patches. Where it was not broken, his dermis would have sores and lesions and flare-ups that would ooze pus almost as putrid as his rotting nail beds. Dermatitis and eczema would come to plague him. Mark would find that his gums were receding. Amid all this, Mark would also lose the will to keep up with personal hygiene. Slowly at first, but then rapidly. He would become a disintegrating husk of what he once strove to be. Mark would long for death. There was more. Much more. I would take Mark apart. There under the moon, I made it all known to Azili, who Uncle Jack sometimes called Erzuli, sometimes Erzuli Jan Petro. I had to make sure. The night was clear, and I lit my white candle and poured clean water into the small vessel I'd brought along just for this purpose. I first prayed that Papa Legba opened the way to all the Loa, all the Iwa. I prayed that all my Loa, my Iwa, turned their attention to this task. I prayed my ancestors did the same. I prayed that my Met Tet intercede with all the spirits who walked with Mark and ensure they were part of this hex, to pass the message on. I entreated the spirits to do this for me, and that I was praying honestly and selflessly. I concentrated fully and let them see my heart's purpose held no lies. I moved toward nearing the end with what most would know as the prayers of Catholics. I intoned 1 Our Father, 3 Hail Marys, and ended with the Apostles' Creed. Finally, I completed the prayer and the initiation of the Hexbag with a resonant, confident Ayi Bobo, a hallelujah mixed with a little amen. And there it was. It was time for Mark E. Hoxson to die. Well, remember, if not die, then to wish for death. to plead with me to end his hellish existence and the unending pain he was in, only to have me laugh and ensure he knew it would never stop. The stars in the firmament twinkled a bit more rapidly, a bit more frequently as I walked into the night. And in a nightclub somewhere in the city, Mark E. Hoxson's thumbnail caught on the side of a table and, wouldn't you know it, popped right off. Thank you for listening to Hexbag for a Douchebag, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds and music that you have heard throughout this short story come from YouTube's free music library and freesound.org. Everything is being used under CC 01.0 public domain dedication licenses. And, of course, that does it for Prose this week. I hope you enjoyed this one longer short story, and you'll be in for a similar treat in 2 weeks' time. Until then, I will plead with you, as I always do, to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, stranger than fiction. With all my sincerity, I can't thank you enough for listening.